دایی یه فرصت خوب حالا پشت مدافع خداداد عزیزی توی دروازه گل برای ایران خداداد عزیزی باز هم روی زمین گشت سردار آزمون به توی دروازه سردار آزمون گل به نام آزمون برای ایران
بزنه کریم انصاری گل توی دروازه کریم انصاری دروازه پرتغال باز شد
علی دایی سام توپ توی دروازه
یه اشتباه حرکت از کوچان نژاد فرصت برای کوچان نژاد توی دروازه گل برای ایران.
Salam to everybody, ladies and gentlemen. This is only our first step in our preparation to our short-term goal, which is the World Cup. I don't take it as a gratitude or take it as a reward or a compliment. I take it with a sense of responsibility, one humble conviction that we need to be full determined to our goals, full committed to our duties, and special with the clear vision in our mind that we are here to work and serve the people, the Iranian fans, because this is our job, to do our best to make people happy. Of course, we're going to play against some of the best players in the world, but we're going to be ready for that.
Welcome back, guys, everyone, to Bezan podcast. My name's Arya Allahverdi. Today I'm joined by Sina Saemian and Babak Golriz. How are we doing, guys? How are you doing, Sina?
Yeah, very well, thank you, Arya. Always good to be good to speak to you, and also obviously Babak now feels like a special guest. So yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking to him and hearing his views as always.
Good to have you back, Babak. How you doing, man?
Good to be back, Arya and Sina. Looking forward to this.
Good. We were supposed to have Pejman on as well. He had a little bit of a contrarian view on the topics we're going to speak about today. We'll have him on the next episode, and you'll be able to hear his thoughts and his views on what's happened with the national team. However, today's episode will be regarding the return of Carlos Queiroz as the national team head coach of Iran. Obviously, that meant that Dragan Skočić was dismissed from his role, and of course, Queiroz came back a few days ago. He's called up his list a few hours ago. And as a result, we're recording this episode. And yeah, guys, we're going to get straight into the discussion. Dragan Skočić has lost his position as a national team head coach with around 3 months to go to the World Cup. We kind of saw it coming. It happened. He was dismissed initially about a month and a half ago, or maybe 2 months ago, and then he was reinstated. And then when Mahdi got the job, as we discussed in the previous episode, we thought that Mahdi coming in would get him sacked, and then Queiroz would come in. It's happened. So what do we think about that now, that has actually happened? Babak?
I think his position has always been a bit untenable despite the good results. I remember watching an episode of, I don't know if it was called Yazda, this Khordadad Azizi talk show with Karimi and Teymurian and the others about a year ago, before we even qualified, I think. And they were already talking about the possibility of him being replaced. And they were of the view that it's quite likely back then, when there was really no real, let's say, negative cloud around Team Melli. So on one regard, his lack of reputation, his lower salary always sort of made him susceptible. On the other hand, he did get us to the World Cup from a position of almost elimination. I think the results against Algeria, or maybe the performance against Algeria and Korea, the last two games we've had, I think, more or less, were quite poor and alarming. And like you said, Arya, Taj has always had this link with Queiroz, and it's happened. If you want to ask me, is it fair? I would probably say it's not fair. It's a little bit harsh on Skočić. It's quite, I mean, it's the sort of move that would happen, for example, by the Saudi Arabian FA, but it's not usually what we do. And it's a bit unfair, but we've got to look forward now.
It's a similar situation to what happened in 1998. Jalal Talibi came in for Vieira, I'm not mistaken, at the time, quite late into that process of the World Cup. Different situation, of course, now. Sina, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it is a little bit harsh on Skočić, and hearing views of different people on the job that he did, people tend to fall into two camps for me. They either underestimate the job that he's done, or they overestimate it. So they make it sound as if it's this incredible achievement where only he could do this, etc. Whereas reality falls somewhere in the middle. Skočić did come in at a time where Iran was on the verge. Well, I say on the verge, but we were in a difficult position in the first stage of qualification. We ended up getting the results and then went into the final round and we qualified with ease. But I think we got to ask ourselves, why was Skočić in that place to begin with? And it was because of the initial mistake, which was to bring Mark Wilmot. So if Wilmots hadn't happened, would Skočić have been considered for the job? And the answer is no. So for me, then, what that means is the position of managing the national team deserves to go to someone who is a little bit more qualified. Now, that doesn't take away from the job that he did. I always refer back to, going back to the basics, sticking with what you know best. And that's exactly what he did. And we ended up qualifying for the World Cup. Now, as I've consistently said, this decision should have been made much sooner to give Queiroz a better, well, not just Queiroz, any manager that came in, more of an opportunity to be able to prepare for the World Cup. However, being late is better than never. So at this point, we've got Queiroz in. We've given ourselves a better chance. He's familiar with the players. He's brought in almost the same coaching staff as he had previously, I think with the exception of Oceana Cruz. So the staff are familiar with the players, and of course, from what I've heard, Nikunan will be joining up with the team as well. So there's a strong foundation there. The majority of the players are the same as they were back in 2018. So I'm a little bit more positive going into the World Cup. But I think Queiroz thanked Skočić in one of or his first press conference, and I think we also have to be thankful for the job that he did in that period.
Yeah, just to cover that, obviously the coaching staff that he has brought in, Queiroz, Roger Desa, who worked with him in Egypt from South Africa. He was also brought back Lopez, the goalkeeping coach, Ricardo Silva, who used to work with the Bahrain national team as a fitness coach. Then he's brought in João Paixeiro, who used to work with the national team of Iran. I think he was there for the 2018 World Cup. He's like more of an analyst. And he's also brought back kind of the physio rehab coach, Mikel Moreira, and obviously Arya Allahverdi, the interpreter. So, ultimately, yes, as you say, familiar faces in the staff. Skočić, he's lost the job in a very late, as I said, in the process. Did he deserve it in terms of the results, as Babak said? Probably not. Sina, you're right. I think absolutely. Queiroz, no doubt, is a much, much more superior coach than Skočić. I think even Skočić would admit that himself. Deep down, he may not say it out loud, but I think he knows it himself that Queiroz is a much more superior. I mean, the guy coached ultimately. Everyone always alludes to the fact that he wasn't successful under Colombian national team, the Egyptian national team, even though he got them to the brink of qualification against a very strong Senegalese side. Twice, didn't even win. Almost won the AFCON. But then on top of that, he's worked with the likes of Sir Alex Ferguson and obviously at Real Madrid. Obviously, wasn't successful. But ultimately, I'm in the view, and this is my opinion, and I think people might be upset with me saying this. I don't even think Skočić would get a job in the Croatian league. I'm being honest with you. I don't think he would. I don't think he would comfortably get it. So the reality is, as much as I feel for Skočić, I do. I feel for his staff. I feel for Mario Todd as well. Obviously, he interviewed him. I thought he was a nice guy. Did a great job as well behind the scenes. However, just wasn't superior enough for this national team. We should be expecting the best. Maybe Queiroz isn't the best, that we can bring in. I think we can definitely bring in. There's definitely better coaches than Queiroz, no doubt about it. But at this point in time, no one else is going to take the job. He's taking a job with a salary of $50,000 cash in hand, and then on top of that, his assistants are getting $30,000 spread out between the five of them. So the reality is they're coming in on very low salaries. I don't think any other coach would take that job at this time and this late to the process. So we, ultimately that's what's happened.
But let's not forget that this was not about finding any coach. It was for Taj, it was Queiroz. This was the move that he would make that change for. So we were never looking for someone else. It was just Carlos Queiroz. And the history that Sina mentioned and you mentioned, the fact that he knows everyone so well, I think it doesn't really count against us too much in terms of the preparation. We've got 2 decent friendlies lined up end of this month as well. So I'm very optimistic. I mean, I was very deflated about the World Cup. I was not looking forward to it. So at the very least, we can have that buzz back like we had in 2018.
It's interesting. Obviously, you said Taj. I mean, Taj there's been talks about him coming back in the job as well as an IFF president. He is back now. But the question was, when was Queiroz actually contacted by the federation or by anybody in Iran? Roger Dessau, the assistant coach, has actually come out and said in an interview with South African media, the media that he interviewed with is SABC Sport in South Africa. He mentioned how Carlos Queiroz was contacted a week after he left Egypt. That was back in mid-April. And obviously reached an agreement with them, with the Iran Federation a couple of weeks ago. But, it shows you that there was always a plan to bring back Queiroz. And I think that's materialized. How late it is. Sina?
I mean, I'm not so sure about the plan because, it's taken so long. But obviously, as we've found out, he needed Taj to become the president of the federation before that happens. Sorry, Ari, what was the question?
Why do you think it took so long? Like, if they'd contacted them back in mid-April, why is it taking this time? I mean, is it? Do you think
the people we don't know who was in contact first of all, so it could just be some random Ali from wherever. So I think it was only Taj. It's about Taj, and this probably was sometime in the summer when it became clear that he wanted to run for federation president. So I think you needed the right guy in the right place to make it happen.
All right, so let's go on to Queiroz. Queiroz is back now. Obviously, he was the coach of the national team in 2014 and 2018 World Cup. Both times didn't qualify for the second rounds of the competition. However, does this mean that we have a better chance of doing so? Sina? Yes.
Again, going back to what Babak said, I was also kind of feeling similar in terms of not really looking. I wouldn't say not looking forward to the World Cup, but I wasn't positive about our chances and about the results and the performances that we were going to put in. Now with this appointment, there is a little bit more optimism for that initial game against England, and our chances of going to the second round have increased. Now, it's increased compared to what it would have been under Skočić, but we still have a lot of work to do. Queiroz isn't a magician. As you said, yep, he's a great coach, but he's not one of the best in the world. He's not. I always think of him as someone who puts in a lot of time, effort, and energy into getting the preparations perfect for every opposition, and then in matches, as we saw in the 7-8 years that he was in charge of Iran, when something does go wrong, we often miss a plan B or a decisive change to change the kind of the way the game is going in our favor. That will still remain, But I think we'll be a lot more prepared going into the games against England, against Wales, and against the United States. I think, as always, the very first game is extremely important to get a result, because you don't want to go into the second game fighting for your survival. Because if you lose the first game, second game is basically where you find out whether the third game even matters or not. So it's important that we approach that first game. And I know he'll be ready. I know he'll make sure the team will be ready, because looking back at the 2014 and 2018 World Cup, those games I think we were the most prepared for.
Yeah.
Especially in 2014, we got the draw against Nigeria. Really dull game, absolutely, but we ended up getting the result we wanted, which meant against Bosnia we were still in with a chance of going up to the second round. Similar again in 2018, where the game against Morocco was the decisive game. You know, if we lost that game, essentially the Portugal and Spain game didn't matter. And I feel that it's very similar in this World Cup as well. But I have no doubt that we'll be prepared tactically and physically as well.
Babak, Queiroz obviously has extensive experience in the Premier League. Obviously worked at Man United under Alex Ferguson, and he has history with the US national team. He actually wrote a blueprint for the US national team called Project 2010. You can actually go and find it online. Basically, it was a massive kind of the thesis that he wrote for the US national team in order for the 2010 World Cup to be the moment where the US national team, I suppose, thrive and become a leading nation in world football. And at that time, US national team in 2010 World Cup was pretty good. I mean, they did good against England. If you don't remember that one, they did really good against England. If you remember the Rob Green mistake. So I want to ask you, Babak, considering he's got extensive experience in the UK and in the US football, does that mean that we're going to be well prepared with 2 months or 3 months to go?
I think we will be well prepared, but I'm not sure it has anything to do with either of the points you said, because, I mean, his experience in the Premier League is a lifetime ago. I don't think there's any player that was playing in the Premier League at that time currently in the England squad. Same thing with the US, but they are well known, so they're not so, let's say, they're not leagues or players that you won't have data and videos on. So for sure, Queiroz is going to prepare, and they've probably been preparing for a while already. He enjoys being the underdog. That's his mentality, very similar to Mourinho. He likes to create that image, us against the world boys, and going up against the US will mean something to him. Going up against England, definitely he will be up for, and so will the players. So I think we will be prepared. Whether that translates to positive results, I don't know. As Sina said, the problem with Queiroz has always been a plan B. And if we concede the first goal, it's quite often we don't get back into the game. So we're probably going to see a bit more of the game plan against Spain or against Argentina, against Portugal. But hey, that's our only chance.
Sina, how do you see us approaching a game like the first game against England? Do we remain defensive as we were under Queiroz against top teams? Or do you think that, considering England haven't always started so well in tournaments, look at the Euros, the way they played against Scotland, for example, they only got a 1 point out of that game. Do you think Iran could go and try to put it on them a little bit?
Queiroz will certainly hope to do so, but he's not going to approach it in a very naive way where he'll think, actually, if we press really high up the pitch, or continuously do that throughout the entire game, we can get a result. He'll still approach the game in the same way as he's always done, which is to make sure that we keep our shape, make sure that you limit the opposition to very minimum amounts of chances, and rely on the fact that the opposition will get desperate, in which case that's where they will inevitably make mistakes, and will be prepared and will have players in the right positions to be able to take advantage of them. Queiroz plays, for me, when he sets a team up, it's more or less setting up a trap for the opposition, whether it's on the ball or off the ball. And that's exactly how we'll play against England, US, and Wales. The thing, like I said, the thing that he'll be hoping on is that England get desperate as the game goes on. And knowing how Southgate operates, I'm not sure if England will take those risks to make sure that they go all out against Iran after, for example, if it's 0-0 after the hour mark. That's the difficult part. But in terms of how he will set the team up, he'll still set the team up with kind of a mentality that we don't want the ball. The opposition can have the ball. We'll just make sure that we occupy all the spaces. We'll protect the spaces, and we'll make sure that England's midfield, fullbacks, etc., aren't able to supply the forward line with as many opportunities as possible, and at the same time hope that with the likes of Azmoun, Taremi, and so on, we can catch them on the break. But also, I think in this tournament, more than the previous tournaments that he's been with Iran, I think set pieces will play a much bigger part than they have done previously.
Babak, obviously we have 2 games against USA and Wales, which are more likely where Iran could get victories. Do you believe with the return of Carlos Queiroz that becomes a reality, or do you still think that there will be a level of pragmatism within those matches as well?
No, I think we've got enough history with Carlos Queiroz to know how he sets up his teams. And I think the game plan will be roughly quite similar across all 3 games. Yes, we might be a little bit more expansive against the US or Wales, possibly, but I think the game plan is always going to be stay tight in defense, have a tight unit between the lines, and hit them on the break. Now, whether that's against Korea or against England or against the US, I think it's the same. Against weaker opposition, like relatively weaker, let's say like Wales, we might have more opportunities to be expansive and hit them on the break. But overall, I think we'll be pragmatic, like you said, and the big difference here is that we probably got one of the best strike partnerships in the World Cup, as long as they're both fit and, let's say, healthy. And hopefully Sardar Azmoun gets more regular minutes for Leverkusen. If this was 1 year ago, the way Taremi and Azmoun were both in form when he was at Zenit, and Taremi, of course, he's been doing it for the past 18 months or so consistently, then I would be even more optimistic. So I'm quite, let's say, worried about the fact that Sardar is not getting games or barely getting minutes as well at Leverkusen.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so coming on to the squad list then, he's called up 27 players for this list. I'll just go through it very quickly. Goalkeepers are Obetzadeh, Beiranvand, Niazmand, and Hosseini. Centre backs are Hosseini, Kanani, Khalilzadeh, and Turali Ganji. The full backs, there's quite a lot of them. Moharami, Mohammadi, Rezaian returning, Omid Nurafkan, Saleh Ardani, and Abolfaz Jalali. The midfielders are Haisafi, Ezatullahi, Omid Ibrahimi, Nurullahi, Vahid Amiri, which we're not sure if he's going to be fit or not, and Salak. And then the kind of forward line, Salman Qudus, Alireza Javanbakhsh, Qolizadeh, and Torabi. And then obviously the strikers are Azmoun, Taremi, and Ansari Fard. Anyone there, Sina, that you look at and you say shouldn't be in the squad?
I wouldn't really say shouldn't be, but the only one I would question is Omid Ibrahimi. I mean, I know we're short for central midfielders, so I get that logic that because there is a lack of numbers, why not rely on some of the old heads essentially? But I'm not sure if he's the same player as he was in 2018 and can offer the same thing. But it'll be interesting to see how he gets on, or if he gets on the pitch in these 2 friendlies. I think our central midfield in terms of Ezatullahi and Nurullahi is kind of nailed on. Not because Nurullahi in particular is great, but more because there's not really anyone better that can play that role. So he's the only one. Rami Rezaian was quite obvious that he's going to come back. I'm not sure if he's a starter. I would still go with Moharrami, not just because of his performances for Dinamo Zagreb in the Champions League, but because consistently he's showed that he's good enough to play that role, and I think he's a reliable player as well.
Babak, anyone for you that stands out that you think maybe should have been called up or hasn't, and that shouldn't be in the squad?
I was surprised that Ali Karimi is not called up.
Well, he's injured. He's injured.
Is he injured?
Yeah, he's injured.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then that's a relief sort of, because when I saw Ibrahimi ahead of Karimi, because Karimi was playing a couple of weeks ago for Kayseri, I was sort of expecting him to be in the squad. It's a shame he's injured, because this is probably the only opportunity for players to, let's say, surprise and break through the squad, unless there's an 11th hour pick on the eve of the World Cup. So that's one area where I'm worried about. Like Sina said, central midfield, I think we're very exposed, very thin. Ibrahim is 35 years old. He's certainly not the player he was 4 years ago. And we're going to need legs in the middle. So I think Haj Safi, the fact that we've got probably 6 fullbacks called up, so it suggests that Haj Safi could be more likely to be somewhere in the midfield. We know that's not like the most solid experiment we've had in the past. Izzatullah is not playing. That's not good. Nurullah, he's sort of like almost like a box to box sometimes, and you sort of feel like we're going to have trouble in the middle against all 3 teams, to be honest with you. So that's one area where I hope someone can break through or we get a surprise. And then obviously Ramin Rezayan getting called back, which probably justified over his general form over the last couple of years. And Carlos was always going to call up people like Ibrahimi and Rezayan to at least see them close up before taking a call if they're good enough to be in the squad, or he's got better players who have broken through since he left. So that's logical. And in the same vein, he was never going to really drop key players from Skocic's squad. It would raise alarms too quickly. Like, these guys are the guys who took us to the World Cup, and he's not even seen them, and he's discarded them. And B, he has to see them up close to take that call. He's a professional coach. He's not. I don't think he's going to favor certain players over others. He's going to look at who are the best players that are going to give him a chance to get results.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. There's a few things I want to point out. Obviously, I'll just go through it myself. Thoughts I had. Goalkeepers, there's 4 of them. I'm not sure if we need 4, but it is what it is. Khalilzadeh keeps his position. Obviously, notoriously wasn't called up under Carlos Queiroz for a long time. Now he's staying. He's called up 4 centre backs, so I think he's nailing them down as the 4 that will be in the World Cup. Obviously, Praliganj coming back as well. You mentioned there's 6 fullbacks. I think he really wants to kind of find out who his best 2 fullbacks are. We just saw Moharrami. I mean, fair play to him. He's playing in the Champions League. 2 starts in a row. Played really well against AC Milan. I could see him hopefully doing a lot better than he did last season for Dinamo Zagreb. I want to see more from Milad Mohammadi as well. He's not starting regularly at AEK Athens. We need to see him play, because he is still, in my opinion, at the right age to be a starting fullback for the national team. But I don't know what's happened to him. He's brought in guys like Abolfaz Jalali and Hardani, who obviously were called up under the Skočić era. So they're staying. You mentioned the midfield. For me, I think you guys are picking on Omid Ibrahimi a little bit too much. I think Omid Ibrahimi, ultimately, we don't have a lot of players of his mold. Yes, he's a little bit older, but he's end of the day, he's a guy who can keep the ball and you can actually do something with it. I don't think we have players like that in that position. I don't think Nurullah can do that. I don't really think, in my opinion, Salak is that kind of guy either. So I don't think there's no other. I mean, obviously you mentioned Ali Karimi, but he's injured, so we have to bring in someone else. I don't really know anyone else that could do that at this point. There's obviously the only other guy that I can think of is Mehdi Pour, which I'm surprised isn't in this list. He was in the initial list, but he's not in this one. So I would like to see him maybe get called up. Attacking midfielders and wingers, I would have liked to have seen Hossein Zadeh, who just moved to Charleroi. I thought he was quite impressive against Algeria when he came on. I don't know why he's only called up 4 kind of wingers. He could have called up more. I don't really see the necessity in maybe dropping a Qayyadi for Torabi, or even a guy like Yassine Salmani, who's done really well this season. And the other one I'm surprised about is Shahab Zahedi, who I think Ansar is a great player, but I think Shahab Zahedi at this point is a much more superior striker than him. So I was hoping to see him in the squad, but unfortunately, Karim Ansarifard keeps his position. Of course, I would have good to have seen both of them in it, but that's what we have just now.
Regards to Ansarifard, I think him and Haj Safi aren't there based on their footballing abilities. I agree with you that if you compare him to Shahab Zahedi or other players, they shouldn't be in there. But they're there to play the role of what Dejaga and Masoud used to play back in 2018 or even the 2019 Asian Cup, because we know Queiroz relies on those players to make sure that the atmosphere in the squad, and they are almost his generals, let's say, amongst the squad. So they have a key role to play. I agree, though. Players like Shahab Zahedi, even Hossein Zadeh, they've earned the right. The one that you actually pointed out, which I think is a great kind of mention, and I don't know how I didn't pick up on this earlier, is Mahdi Pour. I think he's a great player and he should be in there. And I genuinely think he should compete with Nurullahi for a starting spot in the World Cup. So that's a real big surprise, Arya. Very good point.
Yeah, I mean, considering we don't have a lot of midfielders, I'm surprised, and honestly, I just don't get how Milad Salak is getting in this list. Yeah, I get he has supporters, Salak. I know he's a hardworking player. I know he does well for Persepolis, but every time I've seen him play, I've just never been impressed by him. I've never been impressed by him at all. And one of the key things that we need in our midfield, in the national team of Iran, is we need to have people who can keep the ball and keep it moving. We don't just need hardworking players, because we have that. We have hard work, but we need to have people who can keep the ball.
You say keep the ball, but we're not going to have so much of the ball generally, and we're going to be
absolutely.
direct.
But when we do have it, that precious moment, we need to be able to.
But that's where you have Saeed. That's where you have Saeed, basically.
But Saeed's playing the second tier of Danish football.
Yeah, but that's the whole different topic. We've got problems in central midfield, but I think the partner for Izzatullahi should be someone who has the legs to press, to break up play.
Yeah.
And that's why I can understand why he's got the players like Ibrahimi, who was full of energy at his peak, and then Sarlak, who's, like you said, a hardworking player. And it sort of makes sense on paper. Are they good enough? That's the second.
Yeah.
That's another point, and they probably aren't.
For me, for me, that guy is Vahid Amiri. That guy that you're saying is Vahid Amiri. I think he's the only guy who can really do that.
He doesn't have the discipline to keep his position when we don't have the ball, Amiri. I agree with Babak. I think a player who can, who's a ball-winning midfielder, if you want to call it that, would be better. But which is exactly what Ibrahimi played back in 2018 World Cup as well. He wasn't there to, to hit 50-yard crosses to wider areas. But I'm not sure he can play that role at the moment either. I'm not sure he has the legs to.
But even
Amiri's
34, and he's had a big surgery or big injuries as well, and. He's not the same player he was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's certainly going to be another problem as well. So I think that's the critical area. And I can very much see Haj Safi playing there.
I think that's one of the reasons why in this squad list, you can see it so heavy in fullbacks and midfielders, because those are the areas that he has to address. Those are the areas that are definitely lacking in quantity, but also quality. So we have to address them. I hopefully the next two friendlies against Uruguay and Senegal will be on the 23rd and the 27th of September. Hopefully they'll go ahead and everything will go fine. I can go and watch the games in person. And we do have good preparations, so we can see who the starting players would potentially be at the World Cup. Any other points we want to raise before we go to fan questions?
Yeah, a big problem is the lack of playing time for a lot of our key players. I mean, we mentioned Izzatullahi. You've got Qudus, You've got Javanbakhsh, who, okay, he's got 2 starts in a row now for Feyenoord. Let's hope he keeps it up. But you've got Azmoun. You've got, if Mohammadi is chosen at left back, which could very well happen.
Side.
If Safi plays in midfield, yeah, I mean, Said, we mentioned right at the beginning. So you've got 4 or 5 key players who could be starting and are not playing anywhere near regular football at their clubs. That's going to be a big problem compared to 12 to 18 months ago. I actually think Skočić had peak players in terms of the way they were at their clubs at the time. Even Qudus was playing regularly. Azmoun was on fire. Taremi, everyone was really at a peak level. Who is a big winner here? I think Majid Hosseini. He was a little bit in the doldrums in the last couple of years, but since he moved to Kayseri, playing regular football, I think he's sort of catapulted himself back into as maybe the number 1 center back. As we know, Queiroz really rated him as well. So my worry is that key players are not going to have match fitness. They're going to be rusty, and then you're going to expect them to play high intensity football for 90 minutes against very physical and aggressive teams.
Yeah. Sina, what do you make of Azmoun? Hasn't played a lot of games for Leverkusen, hasn't played much in the Champions League. What's going on with him? What does that mean for his national team progress?
So Azmoun and other players, in terms of the point that Babak raised, and I'm not saying that I agree with what I'm about to say. It was just something that I came across earlier. I think it might have been today or yesterday, in regards to England. So England have called up players like Maguire, Luke Shaw, etc., ahead of players that maybe a little bit more deserving, considering those two don't really play regularly for the club. Now, someone made a point that yes, that is true. These players aren't playing regularly for the clubs, but on the flip side of that, what you could argue is these players are going to go into the World Cup fresh, and they're not going to be jaded midway through the season. So there is that side, and I agree with some point with regards to what Babak and yourself said, and I somewhat agree with the point that particular person made about the England squad. I think the balance is somewhere in the middle. If players like Azmoun are match fit, they are sharp, it's just they're not getting the time on the pitch, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is if they are not match fit. So if this is a player who's not sharp
But you
at all,
can't be match fit, Stina. You can't be match fit if you're not playing for the past 3, 4, 6
I think
months.
if you're playing at the highest level in Europe, you can. I agree.
No,
I know where you're
like,
coming from, and I agree. There is a difference between someone who plays 90 minutes every game and someone who doesn't. But the difference, especially at the level that we are talking, the difference isn't an incredible amount. You know, it's the difference isn't comparing someone who plays in Iran, for example, compared to someone who plays in Europe. I like I said, I don't really have a problem with players not being on form, for example.
Yeah, but one like Maguire. Let's imagine he starts for England. They're not going to choose 4 others in the same way. We're talking about let's count them: Said Ezzatullahi, Sardar Azmoun, Alireza Jahanbakhsh, Saman Qudus. At least these 4 we can say they're very likely that they can start. And
Absolutely.
you can't have 4 players who haven't been playing more or less for 6 months. They're not going to be on the top of their game. It's just too many.
I want to make a
too
point,
many.
Sina, before you
I
add.
agree. No, I agree, and that's why I made the point that there's got to be a balance between the two. You're right. You know, you can't play 5 or 6 players or half the team. You know, players who've spent the season on the bench. But again, there's a lot of football to be played between now and then. We don't know why Osman's not playing. In terms of by Leverkusen, look, they've got Patrick Schick as well. They've just brought in Callum Hudson-Odoi, although I know he's not a centre forward. But we always knew he's going to find it, I wouldn't say difficult, but he may have not started every game. I don't think they were ever going to play with 2 strikers up top. So it's just a matter of, I think Ezzatullahi is a little bit more of a concern for me because he's already playing for a team in Denmark, whether it's the first division or second division. So their level isn't going to be as much as, or as on the same level as Brentford, for example, or Qudus might be on the bench. So that's more of a concern for me than Qudus being on the bench for Brentford, or Azmoun getting 15 and 20 minutes here and there.
To make a couple of points. It's interesting you guys raise this. Under Queiroz, we always remember there were times where like Deja wouldn't play a game for a long time, come in and he would do great for us. I think if there's one guy who can get the best out of players in those kind of situations, it is Carlos Queiroz. And that's why I'm happy that we're getting Carlos Queiroz as this coach. I think he's the kind of guy that you can bring in who will get the best out of players, even if they're not playing to their top quality. And I think that's why it's one of the reasons why Skočić maybe not staying might have been better and bringing back Queiroz, because I think he's that only guy. Now, other point I want to make is regarding Azmoun. Like, the reality is, regardless of how many games he plays up until the World Cup, he will start. 100, as Babak said, he will start, no doubt about it. So he has to get a finger out in these friendlies. I mean, he has to put all his effort into preparing himself individually in these two friendlies. And as much as that sounds like it's only going to be 2 games and there's 3 months to go, it doesn't matter. You have to. Azmoun's going to play, so he has to do all he can to get himself prepared. And Queiroz, I'm sure, will do his utmost to do that, to get him to that standard. And you never know; he might start playing between now and November. Javanbakhsh is playing a lot more regularly now. Actually, was fantastic on Thursday for Feyenoord. Scored 2 goals. Said, I'm worried about him. I'm definitely worried about Said. I really wanted him to get a transfer this summer. Didn't happen. Samson as well. I was hoping he would go on loan. Didn't happen. So anyway, okay, let's move on to some fan questions. We've got quite a lot, so hopefully we can answer as many as we can. First one is regarding Al-Ayar. Question comes from Amir Isage. He asks, is Al-Ayar 100% out of the World Cup? Yes, he is out of the World Cup. He is out of the World Cup. I spoke to him recently. He said to me, recovery, he's going to try his best, but as far as the World Cup is concerned, he's not going to be able to make it, unfortunately, which is a big shame. A big shame. The next question comes from Mahdi Sakakai. He asks, is Nick Unam coming back? Sina?
He is, isn't he? I read somewhere that he's agreed to come back.
So Usuli, I think he's the spokesperson for the federation. This morning on national television, they had said that the host said that Usuli told me that he's coming back, and then Usuli went on his Instagram story posting an article of an interview that he just did, saying that no, I wish I could come on the show and say it myself. He hasn't officially come back. We're still in discussions, but we hope that it does get finalized. So that's that's been said. So it's not official, not actually back yet. But I think the way Queiroz spoke about it in his press conference the other day, I believe he wants to do his utmost to work with Fulad and try and get him to be the assistant coach for the World Cup. Babak, do you have an opinion on that?
I think it would be a good appointment. It would be interesting. He's proven himself in the league as well. He's got the respect of the players. He knows many of the players. So I think it can only be good.
Which players do you think are guaranteed a starting spot at the World Cup? And that question comes from Hashimi on Instagram.
I think if fit, Sardar, Taremi, probably Javanbakhsh, Said, possibly Beiran Vand. I can't see Queiroz not choosing Beiran Vand. So I think those are probably guaranteed.
Sina, next question for you comes from Martin125 on Instagram. He asks, should we play a 4-3-3, even considering Azmoun's form since he's not been in good form? Should Taremi plays a lone striker? What do you think about that?
I was actually thinking about that when we were talking about Azmoun and when you were saying that he'll be guaranteed start. And I agree, I think he will start. But it would be interesting to see if Queiroz is willing to take that chance and use Azmoun off the bench, so start with Taremi up front. But the issue is then who would you play on the left? I know we also have Golizade, who I think missed out on 2018 because he got a last-minute injury. So it would be good to see him in the squad and get an opportunity. But I'm not sure if he would choose to start Golizade on the left and play Azmoun off the bench, essentially. I think he will still stick with what worked under him 3 years ago and what has worked in these 3 years as well, which is Tamijani and Azmoun up front. And they have a great understanding. As Babak said, that they'll go in as one of the best partnerships in the World Cup. And that in itself is very valuable for Iran.
Next question comes from Twitter from Said Juventino. He asks the possibility of playing a 3-man defense. Considering he's only brought in 4 centre backs, I don't see that as a possibility. If I'm being honest with you, I don't see how that would work. If I'm being honest,
I'd love it though. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah,
I think we have the necessary players up front, certainly to be able to play that. But such a short time, not enough time to experiment. Maybe after the World Cup, then if Queiroz stays or a new manager comes in, it might be worth trying.
Because I think Pro Ali Ganji's best role is as a sweeper. I think he played there against Bosnia a couple of years ago when Skočić was in charge, and I thought he did really well. I thought he was really impressive in that role, and I think he could do really well in the World Cup in that role. But unfortunately, he's only called up 4. So that's it. Okay. Last question. I want to ask you both. Prediction on the World Cup. If Skočić had stayed, what do you think the results would have been? Now that Queiroz is in charge, what do you think the results would have been?
I think possibly 3 losses with Skočić. Maybe would have stolen a draw somewhere at best. And with Carlos, I might end up being the same, but we certainly have a better chance. So tough to predict. It's too early. I'd like to see what happens in the next couple of weeks, but we have a chance.
Yeah, we do these predictions at the end of every episode, and I think at some point we got to draw the line on it. It's way too early. I agree with Babak. It's too early. Even if Skočić was still here, let's ask the same question at the end of this camp and see where we're at that point. I agree we have a better chance now, but to make predictions as to how many points we'll get is difficult.
Go on, give us a prediction, Sina.
Honestly, I'm not sure.
All right, okay.
I think the way the order of the games make it really difficult. Playing England first isn't ideal. Look, I'd like to think we'll get a win on the Queiroz, but like Babak said, it could still go the same way as it would on the Skočić. It's really difficult now. I'd like these 2 games to see how things go.
Yeah, I think the games against Senegal and Uruguay will show more. If I'm being honest, I think under Skočić we would have maybe maximum got a couple of points on like that. That's my maximum. I think under Queiroz there's a chance. I think we can beat the US. I do think we can beat the US. I think they're a good team, but I just don't know if the US are together enough. They call up like 60, 70 players within the last 3 years, and it's like I don't know if they have a tight knit group. Whereas I think Iran do, and I think under Queiroz that will be more evident. And Wales are a strong team. You know, I think we can do well against them as well, though. I do, but again, it will have to come down to these 2 friendlies, which are next week, the 23rd of September against Uruguay, 27th of September against Senegal. Both matches will be played behind closed doors, so no fans. However, I do believe they will be broadcast. I will be there. Hopefully, I'll be allowed to record or take photos. I'll be there as a media member, so I look forward to it. As a result, that means we probably won't do spaces. It depends if anyone else from our team would like to do that responsibility. I normally take it. Normally, maybe Samson might do it. So we'll see what happens. So we might have a space before each game. We will have a podcast out in a few days, hopefully, if we can organize it quickly enough, covering these 2 matches. We'll have journalists from each country. You can support us on Patreon on patreon.com/GoldBezan. Follow us on social media at GoldBezan on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're also on TikTok now as well, and all other podcast platforms, including YouTube. Stay tuned. We'll be back very, very soon, and take care. Thanks a lot, Sina.
Thank you, Arya. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Salman Godus. I'm playing for the Iranian national team and Brentford Football Club, and you are listening to Gol Bezan podcast.